For today's main topic, as mentioned before, we're going to go through the Investopedia article. It's right here. Managing money as a newly married couple. Pros and cons of 3 ways to run your finances now that you are family. I want to let you know that I am not sponsored by Investopedia. I simply saw the title for this article and thought it would be fun to react to it with you here today. Let's dive into the meat of the article here. How will you manage money as a newly married couple? One practicality you need to discuss, preferably before saying I do, is what your money style will be going forward. I totally agree with that. Well, it's true. In general, getting married makes financial sense. How do you make it make sense? And sense for you. Haha, clever pun. There are 3 main ways that couples manage their finances: separately, jointly, or with a combination of separate and joint accounts. Here are a few tips to help you figure out which strategies will work best for you both, along with the pros and the cons of each system. I want to add here, as a financial coach who's a huge advocate for marriage, I believe that the absolute healthiest way, with a rare exception, to manage money in marriage is with joint accounts. They probably cover why I have that opinion in the article, so we're going to keep going and see, and if they don't, I'll add my 2 cents. Let's continue with the key takeaways from the article. Honesty about money is essential for trust in marriage. Agreed. Couples can manage their money with separate accounts, a joint account, or some combination of the 2. All are possible. Separate accounts help avoid arguments, but take more planning and may lose out on the best way to manage your family money. Interesting. A joint account makes budgeting simplest. Agreed. But can lead to more conflicts if partners' spending habits don't mesh. Combining a joint account with a private checking account for each spouse lets you track expenses and creates fewer money conflicts. Money can be one of the most difficult topics for couples, but no matter how uncomfortable it feels, the 2 most important words to remember about marriage and money are never lie. Just as honesty is crucial to any relationship success, honesty is essential in discussion about money. Lying about finances to a spouse damages trust and can ultimately lead to divorce court. Don't be tempted. And that's my biggest problem with the separate accounts. It does take more effort to communicate about everything. And even though you may not intend to lie if you're running separate accounts, it can come across that way if you're not telling the full story, or you're not being very forward and transparent with how you're managing your money, how you're spending it, how you're giving it, and what you intend to do with it. By having separate accounts, you have to have a very vivid plan on how you're going to be communicating your financial intentions with each other, lest a simple omission of information be interpreted, be it true or false, as a lie. The other thing that I have a problem with the separate accounts is it allows you the freedom to engage in financial behavior that may be disapproved of by your spouse. The number 1 indicator that a marriage is on the rocks and tending toward failure is one spouse simply thinking that the other spends money foolishly. If you have a joint account and you have to make your spending decisions on paper on purpose with a budget before the spending happens, there's no room left for judgment if you stick to the budget. So it simply removes the possibility, when exercised well, it removes the possibility that you think your spouse's spending habits are a violation of what you see to be properly frugal. Managing money as a newly married couple with separate accounts. Keeping separate accounts may be a comfortable starting point for many couples, especially when they are accustomed to managing their own finances and don't yet have many shared expenses. When couples move in together, there will likely be at least some income difference, not to mention debts that are brought into the relationship. A separate accounting system can help clarify income disparities, debts, and potential spender versus saver personality conflicts. Despite the autonomy, separate accounts actually mean more communication about who will be responsible for paying what. Some couples decide to split expenses down the middle, while others may be more comfortable paying proportionally according to what they earn. A shared spreadsheet may be the easiest way to track expenditures, or using a joint credit card may be preferable. You will still have to budget for household expenditures and discuss long-term savings and retirement goals. Still, separate accounts provide you with more freedom to manage your money with autonomy. Before I comment on this, let's go over their pros and cons. Pros: you are each responsible for your own spending habits and paying off any debts you brought into the marriage, provided you are both happy with how you've agreed to split the shared bills. This money management method is most fair, and you may be less likely to argue over your spouse's spending habits. Cons: keeping track of who owes whom what is a lot of work each month. This financial management method gets more difficult if children enter into the mix, or if one of you wants to change careers or go back to school. If you are both saving for retirement or goals based on your own incomes, you may not be optimizing your investments. Okay, let's talk about this for a second. If you're married, you just get married, one spouse has a ton of debt, like a big student loan debt, and the other one has been saving and investing and has a pretty decent amount of money that's just sitting there in a pool. And that pool of money is greater than the other spouse's debt that they have on student loans. Let's assume that these spouses are both working, and the working spouse with the student loan debt is not making as much as the other. Is it going to be optimal or fair to tell the spouse who brought in the student loan debt, hey, you need to pay this off. I know that you don't make as much as me, and I know that collectively, if you look at our picture together, we have enough money to cut a check and pay it now. But, that was my money before we got married, so you need to work extra hard and get rid of that debt. No, I don't think that's the best way to go, because you're married. All of everything that you have on this earth now belongs to each other. That's the way that the law is structured. If something were to happen to one spouse, the other one would inherit the other's net worth, anything that belonged to them. Goodness, the way we file taxes can be jointly as if everything were combined. And if one spouse decides to stay home with the children and the other one earns the money, managing money separately then makes even less sense, because the person who's staying at home is providing a great deal of value by removing the expense of childcare. So what is that spouse who's staying home supposed to do if the primary breadwinner wants to continue maintaining everything separately and they believe that they have to pay for the bills, but the other one doesn't get any say then in the savings goals and the like? That doesn't make any sense. A marriage is a partnership where both spouses get equal say, regardless of pay, when it comes to their futures. To do anything shy of giving each spouse an equal vote is to tell one spouse that they are lesser than the other just because of the income they make. And income, money, is not a scorecard for spouses to compare each other and provide a source of division. Money should be something that simply promotes healthy communication and planning that helps you grow your goals together so that you can live a mutually beneficial, mutually agreed upon future, hope-filled financial future that is beautiful. Let's jump back into the article. This part is a little shorter. With a joint account, in terms of simplifying your management style as a couple, this choice is probably the easiest, though there are some fine points to consider. No one needs to determine relative income payment levels. You don't have to update a spreadsheet each month, and all children's expenses get paid out of the family account. Budgets can be easily tracked on a spreadsheet or on budgeting software that is available online or with smartphone apps, and the simplicity will make tracking spending easy. Oddly enough, that sounds an awful lot like our budget tip today. You need to be spending out of as few locations as possible in order to maintain a simple way of spending money that is easy to track and easy to apply to budgeting. It reduces your friction from exercising the healthy habit of frugal budgeting. Let's talk about the pros in the article. Pros: it's easier to track budgeting and spending. Ding ding. Plus, there is no monthly division of resources. Ding ding. And no financial changes are needed as the family grows. Wonderful. Cons: judging your partner's spending habits can lead to resentment, especially if one partner earns more than the other. It also may be hard to keep surprise gifts a secret. All right, the surprise gift thing, yeah, that's something that you run into for sure. But there are ways around it, and Amanda and I have. I should probably put that as a budget tip in the future. So they say that judging your partner's spending habits is like the big con here for having a joint account. But to the contrary, if you are making a plan together and you are agreeing on that plan, you're actually running a budget, then you don't get to judge your spouse's spending habits. They're transparently presented, in advance in the budget. And, you could have some fun money, and you can say you can spend this fun money on whatever you want. We know that our plans and our goals and our priorities are accounted for before that fun money is spent. So you can go spend it on whatever you want, and you agree there is no shame, no blame, no judgment for spending that money on whatever it is that the spouse discretionarily wants to engage with. Unless, of course, that spending is something that is relatively immoral, but that's a different problem altogether. But a joint account allows a transparency and a clarity that removes the judgment that can be there when you run a budget. If there's no budget involved and you're managing things together, yeah, you could open up a great deal of room for judging each other. But that also exists when you manage money separately too. It entirely exists there. You simply are able to fabricate in your mind, since you're not necessarily running your spouse's numbers. If you keep it that separate, you can be seeing the things that they bring home each day and go, oh, you know what? They're spending way too much on video games, or they're spending way too much on this particular hobby, or why are they spending so much on food and eating out? I would never spend that kind of money on that. The way that you can inflate that judgment in your head with separate accounts is overblown by separating the accounts. It takes the judgment and sweeps it under the rug so you don't have to discuss it. And if you don't have to discuss it, it allows the dirt that's under the rug to grow and grow and grow until it pops, and you have a major problem. Again, the number one indicator that a marriage is going to fail is judging the other for their spending habits. I think a joint account with a budget is the way around that to alleviate the greatest threat to your marriage happiness. With that, let's move on to the last section of the article, with both separate and joint accounts. Having both separate and joint accounts can be complicated, but it also may be the best solution for some couples. This method's idea is that all income goes into a joint account or accounts, and all savings, debt, and retirement are managed jointly. Besides, each individual has a private checking account into which a set amount is transferred each month. Effectively, this is a way of having some semblance of fun money that's assigned to each spouse, but giving each spouse a debit card, an account that they can spend out of without the other one necessarily seeing those expenses. This personal fund can be spent on wants or needs they have that aren't a joint expense, or on gifts for their spouse. This way, your spouse can never judge you for buying $400 shoes or top-of-the-line headphones, as long as you pay for them out of your own account. The amount that goes into the personal accounts each month needs to be discussed and agreed upon to avoid conflict. This takes the idea of, okay, here's the fun money that you can spend in the budget, and it comes out of your joint account, and simply extends that to separating accounts with the perceived goal of avoiding judgment. But as I mentioned before, avoiding judgment isn't what you're doing when you're separating accounts. You're creating a lack of clarity for what the money is being spent on, and allowing an inflated or skewed perspective from the spouse to possibly grow and basically make out a straw man that represents unhealthy spending that may or may not actually be happening. I think removing transparency removes a level of trust. By dropping the boundaries of having separate accounts, you're dropping the ego boundaries that could separate you in marriage, where you should be unified on the most intimate and emotional level. And arguably, combining money is one of the most intimate ways that you can unify your marriage. Now, it mentioned here again gifts and how it's harder to give a surprise gift when you're married and you have everything joint. So I should probably go back to that. I don't think I hit it before. One thing that you can do is you go and you buy a gift card with the amount that you have on the budget. And you say, okay, this is the amount that I have to spend for XYZ gift for my spouse, for their birthday, for Christmas, for our anniversary. And you give them that little pre-charged gift card that they can spend almost anywhere. That's one way around it. Another one is you allocate the amount that you're allowed to spend on the gift for the other in the budget, and know that you need to spend from a place that's not going to, in the checking account, say, hey, you spent money from here, and list out what it is that you bought. Like you could go to an online store that you both don't go to or don't have a joint account on for, say, Amazon. You don't necessarily have to have the same Amazon account. You could buy it from an Amazon account that your spouse doesn't have. It says Amazon purchase, but you don't know what it is that they got you in particular. Another thing that I did recently for Mother's Day is Amanda wanted lilacs, and we knew that we were going to basically be buying lilacs for Mother's Day. That was somewhat a joint decision, but I still wanted to have a surprise. So what I did, my sister works at a nursery, and I told her to pick up the lilacs and have them for when we were visiting my parents just before Mother's Day, and I would be able to surprise her with the lilacs and then pay my family back for the flowers at that point. In that case, an expense didn't even pop up as we're updating the budget and managing the money there. And it wasn't anything that I had to hide in that respect, but I was still able to surprise her with a gift. And, the idea of surprise gifts, I say hide. I think surprise gifts are the only context where it's okay to be keeping a secret in marriage like that. And it's agreed upon that you're doing it for the sake of a fun surprise. Let's jump into the pros and the cons here that they have. Pros, you have the ease of tracking that you get with joint accounts, and you don't have to deal with income disparities while paying the bills. You each have the freedom to buy what you want without discussing it with your significant other, but you also work together toward joint goals and retirement. Again, if you, in your budget, and you're 100% joint, you have a particular amount of fund money that's allocated to each spouse that they can spend without consulting the other, you can have the exact same freedom while maintaining the total transparency that joint accounts have. Cons. This method is simple to track, but it requires opening and managing several bank accounts. Having an amount deposited into your personal account each month may feel like an allowance, which might rub some people the wrong way. Yeah, that could definitely come across as weird, especially if you only have a separate account for the spouse who's not running the books all the time, the free spirit, and they feel like they're getting an allowance, but the nerd keeps the free money for themselves in the joint account because they're like, oh, I don't need to hide anything from them because they're not checking the checking account every day. Well, that could definitely feel like you're getting an allowance. And stepping away from tracking your fund money or your fund spending money could lead you to a point where you inflate what you're giving each other for individual discretionary monies to a point where it almost defeats the idea of having a joint account altogether. You end up going beyond what your fund money would be if you were in a joint account only. And that might sound like a benefit to you. Woo, I get to spend more money. But it could be taking away from some of your other major goals if you're not watching every dollar. And you can only do that simply if you're spending out of one place together. The article does have one more bit here called additional tips for all couples. Regardless of how you decide to manage your money, you must also consider many things when planning your lives together. Every household has to decide who pays for what. Unlike your past experiences with roommates, however, you probably won't want to keep pantry items separate in your marriage. You also have a vested interest in paying bills on time to preserve your credit. Important, a spouse isn't just a roommate. You need to figure logistics and plan as a family for shared goals and an excellent credit rating. While they're putting more emphasis on a credit score than I probably would, it's true. You don't want to treat your marriage like you have a roommate or a joint venture. Combining finances is a great way to separate the relationship that you would have with a roommate as opposed to one that you have in marriage. You don't combine finances with a roommate. That's just not done. Well, it's not the most romantic part of moving in together. Newlyweds need to talk about household logistics, who pays which bills, how you will reimburse each other, and how you will work toward shared goals. Plan to sit down and discuss these logistics to ensure you both understand and agree on the plan and that all your bases are covered. That's the other thing that's kind of hinted at there. If you have separate accounts, you have to almost be paying each other back or reimbursing each other or talking about who pays what, almost like you are roommates or almost like you're a joint business adventure. And it just becomes very technical in a way that doesn't emphasize the beauty of marriage. Once it's decided who pays which bills, automate the payments so you're never late. and your spouse never has to worry and continues to discuss finances regularly in money matters, clarity is paramount. Clarity is paramount. Newlyweds should also discuss retirement and long-term goals, such as buying a house or taking a dream vacation. If as a couple, and you can't afford to, it's a good idea for both spouses to be contributing to retirement accounts and set up an automated system to facilitate saving for those long-range goals now. Bottom line, there is no right way to manage your finances as a new couple, but with communication, trust, and a bit of planning, you and your spouse can have a marriage that's free of conflict about money. If you're struggling to come up with a joint plan that sits well with both of you, seek professional advice from a financial counselor or a financial coach. The thing that I want to leave here is the discussion they have about trust and how there's no right way to manage money, particularly in marriage. To the contrary, they highlight it. Clarity is key. Honesty, transparency, and completeness of clarity is key in marriage. It leaves no room for misinterpreting your spouse or holding court in your head when you're thinking about what they might be doing with money that you can't see. And you need to be thinking about why you would be motivated to have separate accounts beyond the reasons here. What is the deep core reason why you wouldn't want your spouse to know what you spend money on? Is it because you think they would genuinely judge you negatively for it? If so, having separate accounts is not only going to perpetuate that fear that they're going to judge you for what you spend on, but it's also going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy by allowing you to engage with behavior that isn't approved of by your spouse for some reason. To the contrary, if you have joint accounts and you have a desire or a will or a goal that isn't aligned with your spouse's values, well, you get to talk about it, and they get to basically play devil's advocate and make sure that you have thought through the decision. I've mentioned the TV story before on the podcast, but the short version of it, I wanted a nice TV. Amanda didn't care about TV. I said I wanted to spend $5,000 on a TV. She thought 500 was a lot for a TV. When we meet in the middle and we say, okay, we'll spend somewhere less than $2,000 and we will save up for it for X number of years before we buy it so that you feel comfortable with other things. Well, there's no room for judgment for me wanting a TV, even when it's purchased. If I did the separate accounts or even the hybrid method discussed in the article, well, it's possible I could save up for that TV and I could buy it in either less time or more time or the same amount of time. But she could still judge me for the TV that I purchased because we didn't talk about it. We didn't discuss why I picked that one, why I spent that much as opposed to more or less. There isn't going to be mutual communication and mutual decisions on those big fun purchases that could lead to heavy judgment. And as they said, having separate accounts makes it harder to plan for the future. You have to have a lot more time and attention that creates friction between you and having a healthy, well-communicated plan, while a joint account simply brings harmony and naturally encourages that plan to where you can't deny having a plan together. You have to engage in having a plan together. Next week, I'm going to start the podcast with a fun story, a physics metaphor that I used to use in college. I used the metaphor as a joke to poke fun at myself, but now, as a financial coach, I use the same physics joke to explain how managing money in marriage in a particular way can help lead your hearts to grow together. You don't want to miss next week's episode. Subscribe if you don't want to miss it on Tuesday. And until then, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.